For him, high school was not worth finishing.
But he also dropped out of college.
Why did he do it? How did he convince his parents?
He had to prove that he had a goal. He had a vision.
Hey, what if I could create a little app that pull notes?
This is Ali Mir.
And he set out on a journey to make his dreams a reality.
And I would just avoid it at all cost.
Welcome to the Journey Towers podcast with your hosts Mahdi and Almathkur.
So I didn't take the traditional route. Typically, after high school, you go to college, 4 years, and then you get a job. And then, if things go well, you start a startup afterwards. But my journey was a little bit different. I took the California high school proficiency exam to skip high school, but basically I just thought it was kind of irrelevant. And then, when I went to college, which at the time it was De Anza College as well as Foothill College, I just realized that college wasn't really for me, and I did some soul searching, and I did a few projects, and then I realized that programming was something that I was really interested in, passionate about, and I had this startup idea at the time, and I created multiple startups, and then when none of them worked out, I did one other additional startup called ClassCode, and ClassCode was really where I learned a lot of computer science skills. So it's basically like a CMS platform for offline instructors to manage in-person classes, right? So for, piano instructors or other creative people that teach in-person classes, they can sort of manage their instructions online, everything from payments to registrations and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And then it didn't really work out, didn't have enough traction, but the skill set I acquired allowed me to go out and work for companies. My very first real job was, after a few contract gigs, I started working at DoorDash and then went to Facebook. And then I went to Morales as an engineering manager, also did some stint at Rippling, and then here I am with another startup idea. So it was a little bit of a weird, unconventional journey, but I think it worked out just fine. Alhamdulillah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
So it seems like you took a very different journey from what a normal student would take. But what, I guess, inspired you to, at the first step, you said the first thing you did differently was you didn't do 12th grade, you took the exam. Was there anything that was there a reason for that, or just what was it that made you feel that would be a good option? And would you recommend that as an option to others who are in 11th grade, 10th grade, and would be considering that option?
Yeah, so at the time I wasn't blessed to have Rise Academy as we have here. My brother and I, when I say we started high school together, and we went to a public school, and then it wasn't really a good public school. So then, my father sort of along with other community members got together, and essentially it was sort of like a homeschooling environment. And so, the high school experience in public school was just not for me. I didn't like it at all. It was a combination of just seeing, people doing drugs, to just an example is I had a classmate, she used to sit right next to me, and turns out that she went to juvenile for stabbing some person 8 times on their rib, because she was part of a gang, and I had no idea, and so I don't want to say that high school is all like that, but at least for me, I didn't have the best high school experience, and so thankfully my father and other members in the community sort of formed this homeschooling environment for us. But even then, I just felt like I was sort of not really enjoying the high school experience, even in the homeschooling environment. So I just took this the CHESP exam, and the advice I have is if you don't enjoy your high school, there's always the option. I guess if you live in California, I'm not sure how it works in other states, but you could actually do this California high school professions exam and sort of fast track, just skip high school altogether after 10th grade. Yeah, so I think it's either you finish 10th grade and then you can take this exam, or you have to be 15 and a half, whichever one. You can meet qualifications for either scenario. So yeah, my advice would be if high school is not for you, then you can always take this exam.
There's always other options that are out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I want to ask you, how did you convince your parents, like, to allow you to take that test to skip, start a startup, leave your job, all this type of stuff? And how did you handle the fear that came with it?
Yeah, the test, skipping or taking the test to skip high school wasn't necessarily like a big deal for my parents. Actually, my father supported it and he encouraged me to do it because one of the community members also gave that as a suggestion. I think what was more difficult was for me to sort of convince my dad that I want to drop out of college. And so that was like a more interesting conversation, for a few reasons. One is obviously like, even though I consider my father to be extremely open-minded, there, at the time there was still this like sort of expectation that you sort of finish your college degree and then you can sort of like have more doors open to you. So I think convincing him that was very challenging, and obviously my mom as well. And to be honest, I don't know if I was able to fully convince them. And I sort of just had to like prove myself, if you will. So that's not to say that I was kind of rebellious, but like, I did my best to sort of like reassure them that this is not a bad decision. Especially like, when my parents saw me do other activities like, doing the startups and all these other like sort of hustles, they saw that I was like, working pretty hard. But I think like the other like challenge for me was like the community and sort of like friends and family and like their sort of perception of who I was. Because like typically when you say that you're like a high school or college dropout, the immediate reaction or sort of like the perception is like, this person must be somebody that doesn't take life seriously, right? But in this day and age, like there's a lot of like opportunities out there which allow you to sort of take a more unconventional journey. And so if that's the journey that you want to go for, I don't really think that's a bad idea. We can talk more about how to do that, but like the general like thing for me is like, if you have other ideas of how you want to sort of like continue your life aside from school, then the road is like there, right? It's not like we live in 1950s or 40s or even 80s where you sort of have to finish certain like education in order to have the doors open. The doors are already open actually today. I can give you like a small example. Like one of my friends, he, back when he was in high school, he developed a program, like a game program for this website called Miniclips. I don't know if you're familiar with Miniclips. But Miniclips at the time was basically like the app store for online games. They had these tiny little games that you could play that were created by third-party people. So he actually like published one of his games and made $20,000 off of that. And he was just like a little kid. And so that's a small example of like the types of opportunities that exist in the world that never existed before thanks to internet. So as long as you have a clear path and clear goal, even if you don't have a clear goal, like as long as your interests and your passions are there, then I don't think it's necessarily risky. And I think it'll be easier to convince your parents, if you show what you do after dropping out, right? In some cases, you'll never be able to convince them until you sort of make it, and I think that's fine, right? But I wouldn't be rebellious though. At the same time, it's a weird.
As a balance point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems like you also have to find the balance between the two.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. What I find is that the fact that you had a startup at like a really young age. How old were you when you started your first startup?
So if I talk about my age, I think like multiple projects. The very first one, like a meaningful one, is like when I would say 15 or 16. So that time, like we had these like different debates with other Muslim communities. Like me being a Shia, I had some Sunni friends, and so like we had some discussions and debate points. And so I had this like idea that like, hey, what if I could create a little app that allows me to sort of like pull notes about about certain like facts from their own perspective, right? And what if the app will sort of like a note-taking app, but like a little more advanced than a typical note-taking app. And I had no idea how to build an app at the time, and so I used this like framework called Ionic, which right now is not really like a framework that people use to build apps, but it allowed me to sort of like test this out both in Android and iOS. And back then, like the infrastructure for building apps wasn't as strong as it is right now. But that's sort of like my journey. My journey sort of started around that time. Also, I had a friend. Asad Akbar, who took me out to some of these like workshops. So at the time, like Rails, Ruby on Rails, which is a programming, a full stack framework, was pretty popular at the time. Believe it or not, like at some point, like programmers thought that like Ruby on Rails is going to eat up everything, and like JavaScript is going to die, which in retrospect is not the case. But yeah, he took me to some of these meetups, and like I met with some people, and like we just sort of like hacked some stuff together. But it was never like, hey, I have this like amazing genius idea, I'm gonna go build it out, and people will come in and download this thing. It was more just like, I guess, curiosity, right? Like how like it would be cool to have like this little app, like it'd be cool to build a little website that does XYZ. And it was just like always curiosity that sort of like made me sort of like create different products and apps.
Interesting. I see. It really seems like age didn't matter at that time for you. Like at 15, you had an idea and you just went ahead and tried doing that. So at that time, you said it was kind of tough for you to learn how to build an app and everything. Now it seems like there's a lot of tools out there. So to someone who has an idea in their head, they want to start something, what would you tell them?
Well, this is an interesting question because, on one hand, even though we live in an age where there's abundance of resources, the problem today is like there's too many resources, right? And so it becomes very easy to sort of like drown in this ocean because like you have too many frameworks, too many like languages to choose, and even if you're not in the programming world, like there's just too many software to choose from. I know as an editor, for example, like I'm sure like Adobe After Effects is not the only thing that people use. There's like thousands of them out there, and so I think like the way that you can kind of go about it is basically just like curiosity, right? Like, just following your curiosity, I think would be the answer to that. Like, so for example, let's say you're really passionate or interested in like building a website, right? You don't necessarily have to go out and like learn the most advanced like web framework, right? This is a mistake that a lot of people make. You can actually just like go out and learn HTML and not even JavaScript, just HTML. It's like learn how to build a very basic website, a very primitive website, and just put it out there. Make it look like it's a website built in 1990s, right? And it's okay. And matter of fact, Craigslist to this day, like if you look at it, it's like the worst looking website, and yet they somehow managed to make a lot of money. And so I think like curiosity is very important. Now, how do you actually like decide on different like technologies or tech stacks or like software and all these different things? I would say just choose the one that you're just very like just familiar with a little bit, and then just double down on it. So if you let's say that there's like 5 different photo editing like software out there. Let's say one of them. It doesn't matter if like this is ranked number 1 in the App Store. Just use it and then double down on it. Watch a bunch of tutorials and just kind of like go about it. The other thing I would do is like don't be afraid rather to break things, right? So like in programming especially, like a lot of people sort of are very afraid to break things. They're scared that they're gonna destroy a program or like burn their computer or something. And that's not the case. The only way that you can tell if you're learning something is if you actually break something, right?
That's right.
To give an example, like, back, I think I was like 14 or something when I was learning like Photoshop. I still don't know Photoshop like very well, but like I kind of just learned it to design flyers for Sabah's websites and stuff. And at the time we had this like, Sabah Youth Group, SYG, and I used to sort of like, I designed the logo and a few other things. And it's not really professional to this day, if you look at some of my work, but it was enough to sort of like help out the community, right? And like the way I did it was I just broke like stuff. Like I went on Photoshop and I played with a bunch of different tools, and things just kept breaking, and for me that was fine. And the other piece of advice I would give is like, don't fall in the tutorial trap, because like it's very easy to like watch tutorials and feel productive, but usually that's a trap, right? What you want to do is actually build stuff. So let's say that you're building a program, right? There's great tutorials out there, like how to clone an Airbnb website. But like, unless you're actually coding it up, so even if you copy the same exact code that you see, you should actually type it out, like literally like letter by letter, right? Like unless you're actually typing it out, you're not actually learning anything. So, that principle applies to any other discipline, I think. So yeah, just follow your curiosity. Don't be afraid of breaking things, and don't go in the tutorial trap, because that's going to slow you down.
That's awesome. I want to add a point. So you mentioned about like not being scared of breaking things or not having the fear. I wanted to connect it to a point about you mentioned like going to different events for like learning about different people, going to different events. And could you touch on a little bit about networking? Because I know you have like the startup, the Spicy of Vazona before, right?
No, it was called Vasona, and then nobody remembered the name, so we changed it to Spicy HR.
That's a good one. And then can you touch on a little bit how you got to network with people and share your idea and, touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think networking is a total waste of time. Okay. I think like networking is what like is a great excuse to just go out and meet great interesting people and drink tea with them and feel like you've done something and pat yourself on the back and come home and feel all like sort of like productive. But I think networking, generally speaking, is a big waste of time, and I would just avoid it at all cost for a few reasons. One is that 99% of like networking events are useless. The speakers that they bring and everything, it doesn't matter how world class. You can bring Mark Zuckerberg, or you can bring Elon Musk or anyone else, and it's generally a waste of your time, right? Maybe you'll get some sort of motivation out of it, but like not really, right? And so the reason why I'm against networking is precisely the biggest reason is because you feel productive when at the end of the day you get nothing out of it, right? It's straight facts. So the other like dangers with networking is that you're spending all this like time and energy just like trying to meet people, but I think like the goal, especially if you're like in high school or early college, isn't to meet new people in random events. I think that if you want to sort of like optimize your time, then like you should be just like building things. And when you start building things, you like automatically start meeting other builders, right? It's kind of weird. And you start meeting them in places that you never expected. So like you might find them on Discord, or you might find them on like different Slack channels, or you might find them on YouTube comments, or somewhere that you never expected, right? And so I think those type of meetings are usually more meaningful and interesting, even if you find somebody on Reddit, right? Then you find some random person in a networking event. And so like, yeah, I personally have avoided networking events like as much as I can. And my recommendation is I would probably do the same. I do have a few friends that run networking events. I hope they don't hear what I just said, but it is what it is.
I see. Very cool.
Interesting.
So I want to talk about another point with people in general, right? So can you talk a little bit about a person who has made a significant impact on your life and what impact they made and left on you?
Yeah, okay, so I think like in the tech world at least, putting religion and everything aside for a second, I would say Mark Andreessen is like probably like the most, like, I look up to him a lot. Mark Andreessen, and it's funny because like when I got married, like I would just like, listen to Mark Andreessen's podcasts, and then like I would sort of like read some of his work and everything. And then my wife was like, who is Mark? Who is this person that you're sort of so obsessed about? And she looked at, she just Googled it up and she saw like this like mid-aged bald white guy. And she's like, everybody else in the world are like following these celebrities and stuff. And you're following this like random. But I think like his story is very fascinating because, he created like the web browser essentially, right? Mosaic, back when he was in college. And, Mosaic turned into Netscape and then, sort of that. And now he runs this like very successful firm called A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, with his colleague Ben Horowitz, right? So I think he's an interesting, character. And the way that I learned a lot from him is by reading a lot of his like past diaries and like his online blogs. He used to write a lot of online blogs, and I also like So that's the thing. The other person would be like Satoshi Nakamoto. I think would be a really like inspiring person. The fact that like some anon person, I'm a big believer in Web3 and like I love crypto, and so I think like the fact that some anon person just comes in and builds like this massive massive new thing, which a lot of people have yet to figure out what it is also very inspiring. Yeah.
Going back to the point of where you're talking about, how you didn't finish high school, you dropped out of college, you started your startup and stuff. Was there any advice that you were given as a kid at that age, kind of before you started on this journey, that you feel was impactful and you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience?
Yeah. So aside from like my personal experiences, just like growing up with, with a father I looked up to a lot and other members in this community, I read a lot of books. So it's weird because like I used to read like a lot of, and I still do, like biography books of just like very boring people in history, right? So I'm talking about like John D. Rockefeller, or like who is today portrayed as just like some evil person, and like regardless of your thoughts about this person, I think it doesn't hurt to sort of like read biographies of people that have done something interesting in life, right? Or like just like Steve Jobs, for example, like just read his biography. I would say like aside from, I think reading biographies probably is the best thing, like the best use of your time if you're not building something. And the reason why is because like unlike motivational books, so the thing about motivational self-help books is that it sort of like gives you a lot of like passion and like drive and motivation, but that doesn't last too long, right? But what does last is like, reading like a biography book of somebody who has done something big, right? And something meaningful in life, sort of like created a dent in the universe. And so when you read their biography, like end to end, you learn from their mistakes, you learn what to do, what not to do. You learn about like different techniques, and just like overall, like you learn so many more lessons from that. So I think just like reading a lot of biographies of like boring figures in history as well, right? And just like trying to figure out like what it is that they did, how they were able to create this massive impact. I highly recommend that. And yeah, like there's a lot of great blog posts out there. For young people, like I recommend like Paul Graham's essays, for example. Like Paul Graham is an excellent author, and I recommend that if you're listening to this, you read some of his essays. And if you're young and you really love to build stuff, I also recommend this program called Pioneer.app, I think it's called. Patrick Collison of Stripe is heavily involved in this program, and it's a decent program. And even if you don't get in, like at least just see what's happening in that community. Try to like be involved in that community. It's for like young high school, early college students who are building something interesting. So yeah.
If there was one point a listener should take away from this podcast, what would it be?
So okay, I wrote down a few like very important like pieces of advice that I want to make sure I convey to the listeners. The first one is like, try your best to escape wage slavery as much as possible. So like don't at this age like never think about like how am I going to make money? Like your entire goal should be like, how do I escape jobs? Like, I don't, like, what can I do to not have to work for somebody?
Not be dependent on someone, right?
Exactly. Like, like, what can I do to not? Because, like, wage, when you get a wage, when you're paying W-2, right? That's like the most dangerous drug. There's a guy named Nassim Taleb. He's an author of some interesting books. He said that the most dangerous drugs are A, heroin, and B, personal wages, like work wages. Very dangerous drugs. The other thing is, like, you're too young for clout. Like, you don't need like credentials and all that at this age, right? You just need to build something interesting. The other thing is, like, don't copy personality traits from your role models, but try to copy the way that they think. So, like, if you're really into Steve Jobs, for example, you don't have to wear the sweater and like
Sure.
exactly, like, and Elizabeth Holmes, for example, is a classical example of what you shouldn't try to do, right? Like, try to be authentic to yourself, and final thing is, like, don't be afraid of going unconventional. The reason why you shouldn't be afraid of going unconventional is because conventional, like, path is the most boring path, and it's often the path that leads you to dismay. And when people talk about being burnt out at work and all that, what they're basically saying is, like, my work sucks, my life just like is ruins. Please get me out of here. I'm just doing this because I got to do the 9 to 5. And I'm not trying to disrespect anybody that's going through that. But what I'm saying is, try to optimize yourself so that you don't, have to go through that, right? And so, like, you should always put yourself in a position where people think that you're working a lot, but for you, it's just like play. You don't want to, like, limit yourself, because you're finding so much passion in doing
enjoy
that.
what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Make sure to check out our upcoming episodes on all the major platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music.
This was the Journey Towers podcast, brought to you by your hosts, Mahdi and Almathkur, and we'll see you in the next one.
Take care.